So I've been sitting on this story for a while now, and every time I try to unpack it, I just lock up. It's messed up, and even after all this time, I don't know how to make sense of it. This whole thing started a couple years back when I was absolutely obsessed with acting. Like, I was that annoying guy who'd randomly drop lines from Hamlet at the dinner table or spend hours perfecting my to be or not to be in the bathroom mirror. I'd done a handful of small gigs with the local community theater, mostly background stuff, like playing a peasant in Romeo and Juliet, or a soldier who dies 5 minutes into Macbeth. Nothing big, just enough to keep the dream alive. But then I heard about this production at the Carver Theater downtown, and it felt like my shot at something real. The Carver was this old, hulking building that had been around since like the 1920s. It had these chipped stone arches out front, and a marquee that flickered like it was on its last legs. Inside, it was all faded velvet seats and dusty chandeliers, the kind of place that smelled like mothballs and broken dreams. But it had a reputation. People said it was where actors went to make it locally, and I wanted in. The play was called The Hollow Veil, some dark modern spin on betrayal and revenge. Think Macbeth, but with cell phones and a synth soundtrack. I auditioned on a total whim, walked in with my heart pounding, read for this brooding lead named Elias, and somehow didn't screw it up. A week later, I got the call. I was in. Elias was this guy who's supposed to unravel a conspiracy and face off with the people screwing him over, and I was beyond hyped to play him. Rehearsals kicked off a month later, and I showed up to that creaky theater with my script dog-eared and a thermos of cheap coffee. The first day was a blur of introductions and awkward icebreakers. The crew was pretty tight-knit already, but they welcomed me in easy enough. There was Sarah, this tiny brunette who played my sister in the show. She had this killer voice and could make you cry with one line. The director, Mark, was this wiry guy with a buzz cut and a habit of pacing while he talked, always pushing us to dig deeper or feel the stakes. He had this intensity that made you want to impress him, you know? And then there was Nate. Nate rolled up to that first rehearsal looking like he hadn't seen daylight in a decade. He was tall, way taller than me, probably 6'3" or something, with this lanky frame that made him look like a scarecrow someone forgot to stuff. His eyes were sunken, like he hadn't slept in weeks, and they didn't blink as much as they should have. His hair was this greasy, stringy mess that hung over his forehead, and he had this habit of clutching his script so tight you'd think it was glued to his hands. He was cast as Gideon, this shady side character who skulks around and stirs up trouble. I figured I'd break the ice, cracked some dumb joke about the coffee tasting like motor oil, but he just stared at me, those hollow eyes boring into mine, and mumbled something about lines before shuffling off to a corner. Weird as hell, but I let it slide. Theater attracts all kinds, right? Eccentric's just part of the gig. We started running scenes that week, and I'll admit, the energy was unreal. The stage itself was this ancient thing, warped wooden planks that groaned under your feet, framed by these heavy red curtains that smelled like mildew. The lights hummed and flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls, and the whole place had this vibe, like it was alive in its own creepy way. I'd spend hours blocking scenes with Sarah. She'd pace with me, running lines until we could do them backwards. And it felt like we were building something legit, Mark would hover nearby, scribbling notes or barking adjustments, and the rest of the cast would filter in and out, laughing over missed cues or complaining about the drafty backstage. It was chaotic, but it was our chaos. Nate, though, he didn't fit. He'd nail his lines, quietly, almost too quiet, like he was whispering secrets, and then he'd just linger. After everyone else packed up, I'd spot him slumped in the back row, staring at the empty stage like it was talking to him. One night, I hung back to grab my jacket and saw him there, script open on his lap, lips moving silently. I asked if he was okay, trying to sound casual, and he just muttered, "It's not ready yet," before grabbing his stuff and bolting out the side door. I stood there, watching the exit swing shut, and told myself he was just deep in character. Method acting, maybe. Should have known it was more than that. Things started getting stranger the deeper we got into rehearsals. One night, I stayed late to work on my big confrontation scene with Nate. You know, the one where Elias calls out Gideon for being a backstabbing creep. Mark wanted us to run it solo, just the two of us under the spotlight, to find the tension. I'm belting out my lines, really leaning into Elias's anger, and Nate's supposed to hit back with this cold, calculated rebuttal. But he doesn't. He just freezes. He stands there, gripping the prop knife, a cheap plastic thing with a retractable blade. Those sunken eyes lock onto mine, and he's not blinking, not moving, just staring. I laugh it off like, "Dude, you good?" But he doesn't answer. He just keeps staring, then whispers something under his breath, too low to catch, before turning and walking off stage. Mark calls it a night, clapping me on the shoulder like nothing happened, but I'm rattled. That wasn't acting. That was something else. By week 3, I'm dreading seeing him. He starts showing up looking worse every time, paler, twitchier, like he's running on fumes. Between takes, he'd mutter to himself, stuff like, "It's all in the script," or "They'll see," and I'd catch him pacing the wings, script clutched to his chest. I asked Sarah if she'd noticed, and she nodded, chewing her lip. "He gives me the creeps," she said. "But he's harmless, right?" I wanted to agree, but I wasn't so sure. Mark, though, he was eating it up. Kept saying Nate brought raw energy to Gideon, that his weirdness made the character pop. I didn't buy it. There's quirky, and then there's whatever Nate was turning into. Looking back, I should have said something, pulled Mark aside, told him Nate was off, that we needed to watch him. But I didn't. I was too caught up in the rush of it all. The late nights, the camaraderie, the thrill of seeing the show come together. Opening night was barreling toward us, and I was laser focused on nailing my part. The theater was alive with prep, costumes getting pinned, lights getting tweaked, props being shuffled, and I was soaking it in. I had no idea how bad it was going to get. No clue that Nate was about to drag us all into something I'd never shake. But that's how it started. Me chasing a dream, and him. I don't even know what he was chasing. Rehearsals were in full swing by now, and I was feeling pretty damn good about Elias. The play was coming together. Lines were sharp, blocking was tight, and the crew was clicking like we'd been doing this for years. Sarah and I had this sibling vibe locked in. We'd pace the stage together, tossing lines back and forth until they felt like second nature. She'd tease me about overacting. "Tone it down, Elias. You're not storming a castle." and I'd fire back about her hogging the spotlight. It was easy with her. Even the tech crew was on fire, rigging these dim, flickering lights that made the carver feel like some haunted underworld. The whole thing was starting to look like a real show, you know. But then there was Nate, and he was like a crack running through it all. He'd been weird from day one, sure, but as the weeks dragged on, it got worse. Like, noticeably worse. Picture us running this scene where Gideon, Nate's character, drops this cryptic warning on Elias about shadows closing in. It's supposed to be subtle, chilling, just a hint of the chaos to come. I'm in the zone, feeding off the tension, and Nate's supposed to match me with this low, menacing delivery. But he doesn't. His voice comes out all shaky, almost desperate, like he's pleading with me or warning me for real. And those eyes, man, those sunken, unblinking eyes, they're not on Elias, they're on me, like he's seeing something I can't. I keep going, play it off, but when the scene ends, he doesn't snap out of it. He just stands there, chest heaving, staring until Mark yells, "Cut!" And he shuffles off to the wings. Sarah catches my eye after, her brow furrowed, and I just shrug. What am I supposed to say? It didn't stop there. We had this big scene where Gideon stabs Elias. Fake, obviously, part of the plot. It's this dramatic beat where I'm supposed to stagger back, clutch my chest, and collapse while the blood packet bursts under my shirt. We'd run it a dozen times and I'd gotten used to the routine. Nate lunges, taps me with the prop knife. I sell the fall. Clockwork. But one night, maybe a month in, he comes at me way too fast. The knife hits my chest hard. Not the usual nudge, but a real jolt. And I feel this sting, sharp and quick. I stumble back for real, hands flying to my shirt, and there's a tiny rip in the fabric. No blood, thank God, but my heart's hammering. I look at Nate like, "Yo, ease up, man." He just blinks at me, slow and deliberate, and says, "It has to feel real." His voice is flat, no apology, no nothing. Mark laughs it off, claps Nate on the back, says he's committed to the craft. But I'm not laughing. That rip wasn't supposed to happen. After that, I couldn't stop watching him. He'd started hanging around the prop table more, poking at stuff when he thought no one was looking. Especially that knife. It was this cheap thing. Plastic handle, retractable blade, dulled metal tip. But he'd fiddle with it like it was some prized possession. One night, I'm grabbing my bag backstage and catch him alone, running his finger along the edge, testing it. His lips are moving, muttering something I can't hear, and his eyes are locked on that blade. I try to play it cool, toss out a "careful, dude, don't cut yourself." But he doesn't laugh, just looks up at me, those dead, hollow eyes, and says, "It's sharper than you think." The theater itself started feeling off too. I know it sounds nuts, but the deeper we got into rehearsals, the heavier the place felt. The carver was old as hell. At night, when we'd run late, it was like the air thickened. Footsteps echoed louder than they should have, and I'd swear I heard whispers from the empty seats sometimes. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or maybe I was picking up on Nate's vibe, but it was creepy. He didn't help. He'd taken to pacing the stage after hours, long after everyone else had split. I'd see him from the wings, script in hand, muttering his lines over and over. Not even the right ones half the time. Just this jumbled mess about the truth and the curtain falling. One night I'm locking up with Mark and hear him, voice low and frantic. I ask Mark what's up, and he just shrugs. He's in the zone, he says, like that explains it. More like the Twilight Zone, if you ask me. Opening night at the Carver hits like a freight train, and the place is electric. The house is packed. 200 people squeezed into those worn-out velvet seats, their chatter buzzing through the air like static. Backstage, it's a whirlwind. Costumes swishing, makeup streaking under sweaty fingers, voices overlapping as we scramble through last-minute prep. I'm pacing near the wings, script clutched in one hand, trying to steady my breathing. That knot in my gut's been growing all week, mostly thanks to Nate, but I shove it down. Sarah's flitting around, adjusting her prop necklace, flashing me a grin. "We've got this, Elias," she says, and I nod, trying to soak up her confidence. Mark's in full director mode, barking orders, tweaking a spotlight, nudging an actor into place, his voice sharp over the chaos. Nate's there too, lurking by the prop table, silent as ever. I catch his eye once, those sunken, unblinking sockets, and he just stares back, no expression, no words. It's creepy, but I'm too wired to dwell on it. Then, like 10 minutes before curtain, Mark pulls me, Sarah, and Nate aside. He's got this wild look in his eyes, pacing like he's about to burst. "All right, listen up," he says, hands slashing the air. "I've been thinking, the climax needs a punch. Gideon's arc feels flat. So here's the change. After he stabs Elias, he doesn't just walk off. He turns the knife on himself, ends it right there, center stage, total shock value." I blink, processing. Sarah tilts her head, chewing her lip. "You mean, like a suicide?" she asks. Mark nods fast. "Exactly. It's raw, it's brutal, it'll hit the audience like a brick. We've got the prop knife, the blood packets. Nate, you fake the stab on Elias, then mime it on yourself. Blackout. Done." I glance at Nate, expecting pushback, but he just nods, slow, deliberate, like he's been waiting for this. "I can do that," he says, voice low and flat. Sarah shrugs. If it works, I'm in. I hesitate. Something about Nate's calm feels off, but Mark's already clapping us on the shoulders. "Perfect. Let's roll with it." And that's it. Change locked in. The curtains sweep up, lights blaze, and we're off. The play flows smooth, Elias brooding through his early beats, Sarah killing it as my sister, the crowd leaning in, hooked. Nate's scenes come early, and he's solid, I guess. Creepy as Gideon, slinking around, muttering his lines in that raspy whisper. I start thinking maybe I've been overreacting about him. Maybe he's just weird, not dangerous. The theater's alive, lights flickering in sync with the synth score, the old floorboards creaking under our steps, and I'm sinking into Elias, letting the role take over. We hit the midpoint, and it's time for the big scene, the confrontation with Gideon. Now, with Mark's tweak, it's supposed to go like this. Nate stabs me with the prop knife. I fall. He turns it on himself. Blackout. We'd rehearsed the stab 1,000,000 times. Retractable blade, blood packet, safe as hell. And the suicide's just pantomime. I'm ready. The spotlight narrows, a tight circle of white cutting through the dark. I'm in Elias's head, yelling my lines. "You betrayed me, Gideon. You think I wouldn't see it?" And Nate's pacing, muttering his rebuttal. His eyes are wild, glinting under the lights, but I figure it's part of the act. He lunges right on cue, and I brace for the tap. Except it's not a tap. The knife slams into my ribs, sharp, hot, sinking deep past the skin. I gasp, stagger back, and there's this wet warmth flooding down my side. I look down. Blood, real blood, soaking my shirt, spilling dark onto the stage. The crowd gasps, a sharp collective sound. But then they clap, hard, excited, like it's the best effect they've ever seen. My knees buckle, pain ripping through me, but I can't process it. They think it's fake. I'm clutching my side, trying to stay upright. Blood slick under my fingers, and Nate's still moving. He steps back, holding the knife, red now, dripping, and turns it toward himself. The audience leans forward, murmurs rippling through them, but they're still in it, still buying it. I'm on the floor now, gasping, watching him through a haze. He doesn't mime it like we planned. He drops the knife, reaches into his coat, and pulls out a gun. Matte black, heavy, no prop sheen. The crowd hushes, a quick stunned silence, but then a few chuckles break through, nervous, like they're waiting for the punchline. I freeze. Sarah's off stage somewhere, and before I can scream, he jams the gun to his temple and pulls the trigger. His head snaps back, blood and bones spray across the stage, hits me, splatters the floor, rains into the front row, and he collapses. A limp, twitching heap under the spotlight, gun clattering beside him. The theater erupts. Not screams, not yet, but gasps, sharp and loud, then applause. Wild, thundering applause. People are on their feet, shouting bravo and holy shit, like it's the performance of the year. I'm sprawled on the stage, bleeding, staring at Nate's body. His skull's half gone, blood pooling fast. And I can't move. The pain's blinding, my shirt's soaked red. But the crowd's reaction is drowning it out. They're shocked, yeah, but they're eating it up, whispering to each other, clapping harder, like we've just pulled off some avant-garde masterpiece. A few laugh, shaky and unsure, but no one's running. They're glued to their seats, eyes wide, waiting for what's next. Backstage, I hear chaos, muffled yells, footsteps pounding, but the curtains don't drop. Sarah's voice cuts through, high and panicked, calling my name from the wings, but the audience doesn't clock it. They're still clapping, still murmuring. Some guy in the third row yelling, "That's insane," like it's a compliment. I try to crawl, dragging myself toward the side, leaving a smear of blood on the boards, but my arms give out. Nate's corpse is 3 feet away, eyes open, staring at nothing, and I'm choking on my own breath. The lights don't dim, no blackout, no cue, and the crowd's starting to shift. The applause falters, replaced by low chatter. "Is that real?" someone whispers, loud enough to carry. "No way, it's gotta be part of it," another voice snaps back. They're skeptical now, heads turning, but they stay put. Too curious, too convinced it's still the show. I hear Mark shouting backstage, "Get the medics, now!" And the crew's scrambling, shadows darting behind the curtains. Sarah bursts onto the stage, dropping to her knees beside me, hands shaking as she presses them to my side. "Oh my God." She's sobbing, blood staining her fingers, but the audience doesn't flinch. They lean in, a few clapping again. Like her panic's just another layer of the drama. "Stay with me," she's pleading, and I'm fading, vision swimming, but I can still hear them. 200 people buzzing, whispering, some laughing nervously. "That's so realistic," a woman says, voice carrying from the front. "How'd they do that?" "They're scared, maybe, but they're not leaving, not yet. It's too good, too wild, and they're betting it's all fake." Paramedics finally storm in, boots thumping, radios crackling, and the crowd shifts again. Gasps, a few sharp yelps, but still no stampede. "Holy crap, they're selling it," someone mutters, and there's scattered applause like it's a stunt. They haul me onto a stretcher, Sarah trailing, crying, and I catch one last glimpse of the stage. Nate's body, blood pooling wide, the gun glinting under the lights. The curtains finally crash down, late as hell, and the audience erupts. Cheers, shouts, a standing ovation. They're still there, still clapping, even as I'm wheeled out, sirens wailing outside. I wake up in the hospital, tubes snaking out of my arm, a dull ache throbbing in my ribs. The knife went deep, missed anything vital by a miracle. But I'm stuck here, stitched up, head foggy from whatever they've pumped into me. I keep replaying it over and over, and I still don't know what the hell just happened. Was Nate just some stupid freak who lost it? Or was he something worse? A seriously deranged actor, so obsessed with making it real that he turned the stage into a slaughterhouse? Those hollow eyes, that flat voice, the way he didn't even flinch. I can't figure it out. Maybe he was both. Maybe it doesn't matter. He's dead, and I'm here, and that's all I've got. What I haven't told you yet is that the play wasn't always supposed to end like this. Way back, when we first started, the script had a different ending, a bad one. Gideon was supposed to kill everyone, Elias, my sister, the whole cast, and walk off alone, victorious. It was dark, brutal, and Sarah hated it. She fought Mark on it, said it was too bleak, that we should give the audience something less soul-crushing. She won, and we rewrote it. But lying here, staring at these sterile walls, I can't stop thinking about that original version. Nate with a real knife, a real gun, and no one to stop him. I don't want to know what would have happened if that ending went through.